We have finally made it to the book of Numbers. It opens up with Moses meeting the Lord inside the tent of meeting. He is then commanded to take a census of the people. But why is Moses now allowed to be inside the tent of meeting? And what's the census about? Let's find out. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Allie Talks Bible. We're finally starting the Numbers series. Now, I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick. I want to knock out chapters 1 through 10. And a lot of it deals with the buildup of the Israelites leaving Sinai. They're going to leave Mount Sinai. And 1 through 10 is kind of the baseline. We're going to start out with 1 on chapter 1, and it talks about a census. That's where we get the name for this book. There's a census taken at the beginning of the book and at the end. That's why it's called Numbers, because they're counting the number of the people. Well, they're counting the number of the men. And there's reasons for that I'll get to here in a minute. But I want to knock out these first 10 chapters because it kind of throws out a baseline of the counting of the people and other details. And then once it gets to 10, chapter 10, it actually says that they leave the foot of Mount Sinai and begin their travels towards the Promised Land. So, let's jump right into it. Chapter 1 is the census. And what they were doing with this census is they were taking account of all the men, ages 25 and up, for military use. They were going to take the census of how many men each tribe had. They counted them one by one. In all of this chapter, it goes through all the tribes and lists out different sons of this, different sons of this person, and it goes and tells out how many people were in that tribe, males of age 25 or older that were fit for military service. The only ones that were not counted in this census were the Levites. Now, if you remember, the Levites are in charge of the tabernacle. They're set aside, they're separate. They're part of kind of like the priesthood. Now, Aaron and his sons are the priests, but the Levites are kind of like along that same line as the priesthood. Then we get to chapter 2. And chapter 2 just kind of runs down how everyone is to encamp around the tabernacle. The Levites are to camp around the tabernacle, and then everybody else is supposed to camp spread out from them, with Judah at the head. And this just lays out where each tribe is supposed to be in according to the location of the tabernacle. And it just talks about how this person is here, and it goes by tribal leader and things like that. And then once we get to chapter 3, now we start getting account of the Levites. And also in this chapter, this is going to go and take account of the responsibilities of the Levites. Because they are responsible for the breaking down of the tabernacle and putting it back together whenever they are like moving throughout the wilderness. And all this takes its place in a span of about a year. They're at the foot of Mount Sinai for a year. They're given all the rituals in order to become pure. And they're working on getting pure, getting everybody clean. The Levites have to be clean and sanctified. But they're not like the priests. They don't get anointed with oil. Instead, they get like basically everything else, but the anointing is something specifically for the priesthood. But pretty much a lot of the same things that happen with the priest also were happening with the Levites. So we get an account of them here, of all the different ones. And then it comes to chapter 4, which is continuing on talking about the Levites. And it's talking about factions within the Levites. And it just kind of lays out, again, the same thing. Like, chapter 3 was laying out all the responsibilities of what the Levites were going to have to do as far as breaking this down, moving it, how to move it, and things like that. And then 4 kind of just breaks down their Levites, but then there's like families within the tribe of the Levites. So it talks about the Kohathites and the Gershonites and the Merarites. And all that talks about them, and it just kind of reiterates what their responsibilities are. And the Kohathites, I believe, were singled out because I think they were the ones that were really responsible for moving everything. And the rest of them just kind of like helped out with other things around, like they were the caretakers of the tabernacle. But the the Kohathites, I may not be saying that right. It's hard saying these names. Not gonna lie. But they were the ones mainly responsible for the movement of everything. Chapter 5. Now, in chapter 5, we come to the purity of the camp. Now, they're getting ready to leave and everything, and they got to make sure everything is pure. And by pure, it means the clean, not like super clean, like keeping everything sparkling and shiny. But as we know from Leviticus, there were different rituals in order to make a person clean versus unclean. And things that would make you unclean, of course, were like touching dead bodies. They had eaten certain types of food would make you unclean. Childbirth made you unclean. So, chapter 5 is just laying out, saying, we've got to get these people outside the camp. They cannot be in and around the tabernacle, in and around the campment, because this has to be a pure and sanctified area. But of course, like in Leviticus, there's ways to become clean again. So it's not like they were exiled. They just had to be a certain distance away from the camp. So the camp would maintain its purity. This also talks about restitution for things that if somebody wrongs you and if they are found guilty of this, then they have to compensate you so much for whatever may have happened. Say, like, you accidentally killed one of their farm animals, and you would have to pay for that replace that farm animal and pay a fee. If you couldn't replace it, you'd have to pay the cost of the animal plus a fee. Just things like that. And it's just a little short passage that's added into this chapter. And then we get to another thing in this chapter, which is like a test of the unfaithful wife. So it's talking about what happens if a man's wife commits adultery. And it's a trial that this woman must go through in order to prove her innocence. And, if a certain outcome of it happens and she's found guilty, then the price of adultery would be put in place. And it just breaks out a scenario right there at the end of this chapter, and that's how it closes out. Then we get to chapter 6, which is going to talk about becoming a Nazirite. So a Nazirite is a person of another tribe that wants to live similar to like a Levite. He wants to make a solemn vow to the Lord that they are going to live a certain way versus the other people, of the Israelites. Because even though, people of the Israelites, they could, do this, do that, and still, give up sin offerings and everything to clean themselves again. The Levites were to take a vow to abstain from all this. For instance, the top 3 things, they were to abstain from alcohol. We know wine was a big thing, and wine, particularly back then, it was made from grapes. So they were to abstain from wine or anything that come off the grapevine, They also had to never cut their hair, and uh, the dead body thing was a big thing also. Sorry, I lost my thought there. So, no drinking, must let their hair grow, must not cut it, is not allowed to touch dead bodies. Um, Again, this is just something that they wanted to do. Just any old Israelite decided that I want to take this vow, they were able to do it. And this tells you in this chapter how to become one, what is expected of you, and even gives a way to get out of the vow correctly. Like, you can take this vow, but you can also nullify the vow if you so chose to at a certain point. Then we get to chapter 7. And chapter 7 is just a bunch of writing down, like, it's repetition basically, of everything that all the tribes offered towards the tabernacle as, like a dedication. And it's just talking about how each group, each tribal leader was like saying, hey, we're going to give this many ox, this many sheep, blah, blah, blah. And it's a lot of the same thing that each tribe kind of gives in the same amount. And it's a long chapter that talks about what each tribe offers for that. Then we come to chapter 8. Now, chapter 8, it opens up with Moses. He's talking to Aaron, and I've mentioned this before about the lampstand in the Holy of Holies. And it just kind of talks about how the lamp is supposed to be set up. And also it reiterates that it must stay burning. It is to be maintained and stay burning. And then it also kind of breaks down to some stuff about the Levites and just how they are set apart, and talks about more about how they can. It talks more about how they are responsible for the tabernacle. It's reiterating a lot of their responsibilities that's already been talked about. So that's a little short chapter there. Chapter 8's not very long, and it just kind of focuses on the Levites some more right there and what their responsibilities are. Then we get to chapter 9. Now, chapter 9 is going to be the first observance of Passover. If you remember what Passover is a annual thing they are to practice to remember the Exodus. It is practiced to remember when the 10th plague went through Egypt, the destroyer came through Egypt, and they took the blood of the lamb and marked their doors, and the destroyer passed over them. And then after that, they were able to exit Egypt and leave. Now, they don't have to, put the blood of the lamb on the door again, but they are to have the meal. There was a meal that was prepared during this. They were to eat the lamb that they had sacrificed to put the blood on the door. Nothing was to be left till morning. They had to eat unleavened bread because the unleavened bread was a symbol because it had to be made quickly. So unleavened bread would be prepared a lot faster than if it had leaven in it. So that's basically what chapter 9 talks about. But then people start asking about how, well, what if I'm unclean and I'm not allowed in the camp, to practice the Passover? Or what am I supposed to do then? So Moses is like, okay, hang on, chill out. Let me go holler at God real quick, and I'll get back with you. So he does, and the Lord tells Moses that if anyone is unclean or is traveling at the time of Passover, they are allowed to participate in Passover at a later time. But he also iterates that anyone who is clean and who is not traveling must observe the original time. So he's still giving people that are unclean or maybe out on the road, for supplies or whatever. Just for some reason, they're separated from the tribes at the time. So he gives them a way to be able to practice the Passover annually. Chapter 9 also talks about how the cloud, the essence of Yahweh himself that goes around the tabernacle. It talks about what happens when the cloud is moving. Like, when the cloud is there, the Israelites stop their camp. If the cloud goes up and moves away, they follow the cloud till it stops again, then they stop. All right. Now, chapter 10. This is where I want to get to close this out. So it opens up with silver trumpets being made. 2 of them. These 2 silver trumpets are made, and what they are used for is to assemble all the tribes for when they're getting ready to move. Or they were also used, to be used for times of war. To ready up the men for certain areas, or to come from this direction, to come from that direction. But not only that, they were also used for the festivals and things like that, as, things for enjoyment. And it just goes into details about how many times if these 2 blow, or you got a long blow, or things like that. Different tones and tunes signify different things. And it just kind of breaks down details what those different sounds were and what they meant. And then the rest of this chapter goes in to talk about them actually packing up and leaving. And it just lays out all the stuff about the order in which they marched. Like, this person heads out first, and blah, 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 blah. And this tribe, and this tribe, and this tribe. It just breaks it down on how they marched. And then it closes it out from there. But that's it. This is Numbers 1. I'm not going to do a summary of this whole book. There are parts of this book that I want to read because they're very interesting and things like that. Because a lot of, like, Leviticus, it was a bunch of lists, and 1 through 10 here was a lot of the same in Numbers. So this is Numbers 1, and I will be working on Numbers 2. And I don't know how long this series is going to be. I wouldn't think it's going to be too long. But we're going to get into it. This is just the beginning. But I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. And as always, God bless.